You are listening to the audio production of The Fisherman's Tomb, the true story of the Vatican's secret search, by John O'Neill, with Sarah Wynne and Katie Clark, published by Our Sunday Visitor. This book is read by Paul Michael. About the author. John O'Neill is a lawyer and a #1 New York Times best-selling author. He has spent much of his life visiting and researching early Christian sites. He is a 1967 graduate of the Naval Academy, a former law clerk to Supreme Court Chief Justice William Rehnquist, and senior partner at a large international law firm. Dedication. To Diane O'Neill, without whom I could never have written this book, and to my brother Peter, whom I also found after long separation. I wonder what sort of a tale we've fallen into. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Two Towers. Forward. Sometimes a story finds an author, rather than the reverse. After writing the #1 New York Times bestseller Unfit for Command in 2004, I resolved not to write again, despite numerous offers, requests, and even suggested stories. I came to Houston in 1975 after graduating from the Naval Academy and the University of Texas School of Law, followed by a clerkship at the United States Supreme Court. For years I was deeply involved as a lawyer in representing many oil companies and pipelines and sometimes suing them. From this, I knew, of course, the near-legendary stories circulating in the oil industry of the great George Strake and his unlikely discovery of the immense Conroe Field near my home in Houston. I only learned the story of this secretive man, however, when his son and grandchildren became my friends. Through them and much independent research, I came to know of his largely undisclosed but immense financial support of the Catholic Church and, in particular, the special projects of Popes Pius XII and Paul VI, including the search for the grave of the Apostle Peter. Since early childhood, I have been a student of Roman and early Christian history and archaeology. My love of these subjects and a restless soul have taken me to many major archaeological sites, from Christian catacombs south of Istanbul to Crete and sites in North Africa. When I began to look into the search for Peter's grave, financed by George Strake, I immediately ran into the amazing story of the great pioneer woman archaeologist Margherita Guarducci and her epic battle over many years with a Vatican priest and archaeologist, Father Antonio Ferrua. I have spent a lifetime researching massive international legal cases involving subjects as diverse as a 1988 oil field case with the People's Republic of China and cases in places like Colombia, Ecuador, and Kazakhstan. Because of those experiences, I was able to track the numerous technical works written in Italian, Spanish, German, and even Latin and Greek tied to the search for St. Peter's tomb. Stemming from this background, I felt compelled to write a book telling the great, true story of the 75-year search for Peter's grave. It was only the serendipitous coincidence of my home in Houston, friendship with the Strakes, familiarity with oil exploration, love of and familiarity with Roman and Christian archaeology, and a lifetime of research in complex international matters that made it possible to gather and record, with the assistance of many others, including my co-authors, the facts of this extraordinary story. I felt that, after 75 years, this was a story the world needed to hear. Understanding both the facts of this story and the need to record it, I nonetheless dithered, doing little writing. Several years ago, I was suddenly diagnosed with 4 distinct types of cancer: throat, head, back, and legs. In the course of treatment, I contracted the dreaded MRSA bacterial infection. My chances of survival were less than 5%. I was and am not afraid of dying, having stared death in the face many times in Vietnam and elsewhere. However, I was afraid of dying with this story untold. My prayer and my promise was that I would survive at least long enough to record the facts of this great story, that it would not die unrecorded with me. I thank my great co-authors, my wonderful friend and agent, Jeff Carneal, and many others who made this book possible. Most of all, I thank God for the time and breath to write it. A slaughter and persecution of ancient Christian communities in the Middle East is underway today, even using the familiar dehumanizing tools of crucifixion, fire, and rape employed by the persecutors of Christians in the ancient Roman Empire. These Christians are the true brothers and sisters in faith of the brave Christians depicted in this book. Inspired by George Strake, I contribute all proceeds I receive from this book to their relief. John O'Neill. Chapter 1. The Visit. Today. It's arguably one of the best-kept secrets in Rome, Italy. Reservations for the tour are hard to obtain, as tours are limited to about 250 people per day. Travel and Style magazine calls it one of Rome's hottest tickets, and the Boston Globe warns that it's one of the toughest tickets to come by in the Eternal City. The exclusive tour of the newly opened necropolis beneath St. Peter's Basilica, called the Scavi Tour, takes visitors on a fascinating journey through one of Rome's oldest mysteries. But the tour only tells part of the story. The mystery itself goes back nearly 2,000 years, and the Vatican's top-secret search for answers lasted for decades, involving some of the brightest minds and one of the wealthiest men of the 20th century. Spring, 1940. The priest came to Houston in the spring of 1940. He was an emissary sent directly from Rome by Pope Pius XII. The world was in flames with the onset of World War II, and monsters like Hitler, Stalin, and Tojo stalked the globe almost unhindered. Poland had been conquered in 3 weeks by Nazi panzers, aided by Soviet armies. The Japanese Empire held large parts of China and looked hungrily south to the oil fields of Indonesia. Black shirts in Italy marched daily outside the Vatican, inspired by the buffoon Mussolini and dreams of repeating ancient Roman glory. German panzers gathered on the Western Front soon to crush France in a new type of war called the Blitzkrieg. America slept amidst the chaos of war. The priest's name was Walter Carroll. Although only 30 years old, Carroll was among the most trusted confidants of the Pope. He was the right hand of the Pope's right-hand man, Papal Secretary Giovanni Montini, better known now as Pope Paul VI. Father Carroll would die young, before the age of 40, but in that short time he would have a huge impact on the world, both during and after the war. As he stepped off the plane in Houston, Texas, however, he confronted a mission far more important and more lasting than the war. Texas was an unusual destination for a papal emissary on an urgent mission. He had come to see a Texas oilman and wealthy Catholic named George Strake. Strake was among the largest single donors in the world to Catholic projects, and he requested that all his donations be made anonymously. Because this meeting took place in secret, the details have been lost to history. The meeting likely took place at the Strake home, which still stands at 3214 Inwood Drive in Houston's River Oaks subdivision. The then newly constructed English home on an acre backing up to Houston's most prestigious country club was among the largest and most stylish in the city. Houston, then a city of 400,000, had largely avoided the Great Depression due to the vast oil reserves surrounding it, its great port, and the ingenuity of its businessmen. No record remains, except perhaps in Vatican archives, of the precise words of that meeting. However, it became a part of the heritage of the Strake family. Carroll came to Strake with a highly sensitive request from Pope Pius XII and Monsignor Montini. The Catholic Church sought Strake's commitment to finance a special project. Carroll explained that this project, one of the most important in the Church, would involve immense, uncertain cost. Moreover, if Strake agreed to finance it, he could tell absolutely no one about it. In effect, the Church was asking Strake to sign a blank check, without credit or reward, for a totally secret wildcat project of very doubtful success. Strake thought about the strange request and agreed. February 11th to 14th, 1939. The secret project that sent Carroll to Strake had begun to unfold in Rome a few months earlier, also in a very unlikely place. Pope Pius XI died on February 11, 1939. The deceased pope was an extraordinary man, mentor and spiritual father to many, both rich and poor, and well loved by many, particularly by Eugenio Pacelli, his successor. As a serious mountain climber, Pius XI was the first to summit several peaks in the Alps which are now named for him. A Chilean glacier, the Pio 11, the largest in South America, also bears his name. Before he became pope, Pius XI, then Ambrogio Damiano Accelerati, had been the Vatican librarian, the keeper of the Vatican's secrets. He was plucked from the Vatican library and, against his wishes, turned into a papal diplomat. He was known for his no-nonsense attitude, unusual in an age of formalism and ceremony. Before he died, Pius XI asked only to be buried under St. Peter's Basilica in a simple grave. In the middle of February 1939, an excavation team began to dig beneath the basilica for both a grave for the deceased pope and a small chapel to surround it. Because the area below the Vatican was only 6 feet high and the floor of the immense structure loomed above, they had to dig down. In the process, a workman fell through the floor. Very quickly he found himself in an amazing and, until then, unknown world, with bright mural paintings of flowers, particularly roses, birds, vases full of vividly colored fruit, idyllic landscapes, cupids, and pretty winged beings. The dark and gloomy underworld starkly contrasted with the bright rainbow of colors in the paintings. Vatican officials rapidly determined that the paintings were Roman funeral murals from the height of Rome's power during the 1st and 2nd centuries. Digging further, the workmen discovered the remains of the daughter of a Roman consul, wrapped in purple garb with a golden brooch. Then they encountered the most amazing find of all, the much simpler grave of a woman from the mid-2nd century with Christian inscriptions on her tomb. This was an astounding discovery. During its first few centuries, Christianity was a secret, illegal cult in the Roman Empire, and Christians were subject to terrible waves of persecution. Few, if any, Christian artifacts survived from this early period. Across the entire Mediterranean world, Christian inscriptions or signs from the 1st and 2nd centuries are extraordinarily rare. To date, archaeologists have uncovered a few inscriptions in a hidden cave south of Istanbul, various marks in the catacombs, coded messages through the fish symbol, the ichthys, the Good Shepherd, the altered cross, and the like. The workers and Vatican officials were stunned at the discovery of this early Christian woman's grave. Blood sport was a popular form of entertainment in the Roman Empire. During waves of persecution, Christians were captured, tortured, and publicly killed before large, enthusiastic crowds. Sometimes they were crucified, burned, boiled, or torn to pieces by wild animals in front of appreciative and wildly cheering spectators. At best, the remainder of the Christians' families would be enslaved and their property seized. Informers were incentivized by a share of the victim's property. Sometimes captured Christians were tortured until they gave up the names of other believers. The Roman governor Pliny writing to Emperor Trajan, noted his frustration that many Christians, even under torture, would not recant. One such brave Christian, a young mother named Perpetua, was stripped of her baby and sent to be torn apart by wild beasts in AD 203. She would not recant, even to stay with her baby. The Christians were incomprehensible to Roman authorities, but they saw them as superstitious enemies whose elimination was required by the dignitas of imperial Rome. In those days, the Roman Empire stretched from Persia in the east to Land's End in England in the west, and from Melk in Austria and German outposts to the deep North African desert. The empire had seldom lost a war in its long history, and even its battlefield losses were few. It achieved a degree of engineering, wealth, and civilization that would not again be reached for many centuries. The famous Pax Romana had descended on the Mediterranean world. The impudence of the small Christian cult in honoring as God a criminal condemned by Roman law was intolerable to Rome, if also regarded as somewhat insane. Indeed, the world must have, not illogically, perceived the failure of the small cult to disband as crazy. Christians were viewed as a particularly secretive cult accused of practicing horrific rituals. They were unpopular and risked death if discovered. As a result, they could not leave any traceable public displays of their beliefs. They were a cult of caves and catacombs. Thus, the 1939 discovery of Christian inscriptions deep in the seat of Roman power, a few hundred yards from the place where the emperor's palace once stood, was hardly believable. All work ceased, and the highest Vatican official was summoned to verify with his own eyes this improbable find. Papal Secretary of State Eugenio Pacelli, soon to be elected as Pope Pius XII, was responsible for burying his predecessor. This discovery of an early Christian's grave under the Vatican reminded him of an ancient Christian legend. Christian tradition from the earliest times held that the Apostle Peter had gone to Rome and, after his nearby execution by the Emperor Nero around AD 66, had been buried on Vatican Hill. A number of 1st and 2nd century writings supported this tradition, ranging from Tacitus's description of Nero's slaughter of Christians following the Great Fire of Rome to early 2nd century Christian accounts. The tradition further related that 250 years after Peter's death, Emperor Constantine had built the first St. Peter's Basilica in Rome as a memorial to Peter directly over his grave. Secret excavations by the Church in 1513 and 1683 to verify the truth of the long-standing tradition found only pagan graves, however, and the Church abandoned any further effort to find Peter. While the burial place of Peter is a pious tradition and not a matter of faith, the Church, facing the pressures across Europe, especially in the onslaught of the Protestant Reformation, feared unnecessarily rattling the dearly held beliefs of the Catholic faithful. Very likely discovering a foundation of pagan graves rather than the tombs of saints under the Church's principal and historical seat of authority would have added fuel to the fires of controversy that already raged around Rome in the 16th and 17th centuries. As later described by Margherita Guarducci, the famous archaeologist who would become the heroine of the Vatican excavations, the fear of finding something down there which would contradict or modify the tradition dear to the faithful overcame the desire to appease a burning curiosity. Since his earliest childhood, Pope Pius XII, who grew up in Rome, had been consumed by stories of the early Roman martyrs. He also believed deeply in the science of archaeology. Faced with the discovery of a Christian tomb beneath the Vatican, he decided to recommence the Church's search for the first pope. Against all odds, Pius XII intended to reach across nearly 2,000 years to find Peter. It was a brave decision made in the face of repeated historical failure. Yet Pius XII unlike some of his predecessors, saw science, particularly archaeology, as an ally, not an enemy of Christianity. With the increasing influence across the Western world of the work of men such as Charles Darwin, Sigmund Freud, and Karl Marx, the Pope saw the immense importance of using modern science in the service of religious belief. Numerous secularists denied that the Apostle Peter ever went to Rome at all. Even Martin Luther had cast doubt upon the issue, stating, "It is unknown where in the city of Rome the bodies of St. Peter and St. Paul are located, or even whether they are there at all." Likely, Pope Pius XII hoped that discovering the first pope's bones beneath St. Peter's Basilica would offer a tangible demonstration of the powerful interplay between faith and science. While an increasingly secular culture tried to pit the two against each other, Pius XII recognized that science and truth go hand in hand. Finding Peter would throw the weight of modern science behind a dearly held tradition of the Church, offering a needed boost for the faithful during a dark and often faithless time. Yet the Church was nearly broke from the Great Depression and the Nazi occupation of Europe, so the Pope first had to reach across the ocean for the immense financing necessary to carry out his plan. With his huge fortune and generosity to the Church, Texas oilman George Strake could make Pius's dream of finding Peter possible. Strake surprisingly said yes, effectively writing a blank check to the Church. Father Carroll reported the agreement to Pius XII and Montini. Over the ensuing years, the Church privately contacted the Strakes many times about this great project. True to initial intent, both the search for Peter's remains and Strake's involvement in the search were kept wholly hidden from the world. Thus, one of the greatest explorations of the 20th century began in the dark recesses beneath the Vatican, unknown to the outside world and cloaked in total secrecy. Over time, the search would lead to the discovery of one of the greatest archaeological sites of the ancient world. The adventure would involve an interesting cast of characters, including an American spy for the Vatican. After many overlooked clues and false leads, this ancient puzzle would require an unlikely woman genius and 75 years of searching to fully unlock. This woman's discoveries and battles would rival or exceed those of even the greatest fictional archaeologists like Indiana Jones or Robert Langdon of the Da Vinci Code. As we shall see, truth would prove much stranger and more fantastic than fiction.